And this is really looking at AI 2041, 10 visions for our future. And to lead this discussion, I'm really pleased to welcome futurist speaker and author Amelia Kallman. All right.
Thank you so much, Babita. It's such a pleasure to be here today. And I am absolutely thrilled to be interviewing two authors that absolutely inspire me. I have had the opportunity to get a hold of their forthcoming book, AI 2041, 10 Visions for Our Future. I can highly recommend it. At 11:10 in the catering room, we will be giving away copies, so make sure that you get in there. So I'll be talking today to Stanley Chen, who is an award-winning author, creative producer, and curator. He is the president of the World Chinese Science Fiction Association and the founder of Thema Mundi, a content development studio. His books include Waste Tide, The Future Disease, and The Algorithms for Life. Joining him is Dr. Kai-Fu Lee, who is the chairman and CEO of Sinovation Ventures and a New York Times best-selling author of AI Superpowers. Lee is formerly the president of Google China and a senior executive at Microsoft, SGI, and Apple, and the co-chair of the AI Council at the World Economic Forum. Welcome, Stanley and Kai-Fu.
All right, thank you. Great to be here. Thank you.
So great to see you, and thank you so much for joining us. What I really loved about your new book, AI 2041, is it's really different from a lot of books on AI that I have read. And what makes it different is how you tell the story. It's told through the art of storytelling. I'm wondering if you can share with us a bit about how this unique format came about.
Okay, I'll start. I'm Kai-Fu, and I thought of the idea of using storytelling to make more people understand AI, because AI is so important for everyone to understand. At the same time, it's intimidating to many people. And as a nonfiction writer, I've done my best to describe AI, like in my last book, AI Superpowers, but it still couldn't reach all the people. So I wanted to bring my friend Stanley in through his storytelling to make AI not only accessible, but entertaining. Maybe Stanley can say a few words about what he's done.
Right. Thanks, Amelia, and thanks for having me here on the stage. So as Kai-Fu mentioned, I used to write a lot of science fiction, but it's kind of in a solo way. So we imagine a lot of dystopian future about AI and robots. But to me, there's urgently necessity on describing a more positive and brighter future because there are so many big issues there waiting for us to discuss, especially those need to leverage the power of technology such as AI. So we came together with this brilliant idea to blend the genre of science fiction together with tech analysis. So you can share both sides for the benefits, like you can share the storytelling, very entertaining, comparing narratives. But meanwhile, you can learn a lot, like knowledge, experience, and pretty plausible speculation about the future. So that's our thought.
Book is that you explore not just the opportunities, but also the risks, and you're not afraid to tackle some of the big social and geopolitical issues raised by AI. Some of the stories include things like job loss, inequality, the autonomous arms race, trade-offs between privacy and happiness, and also the human pursuit for a higher purpose. One of the issues that you bring up that I found particularly fascinating is the potential for AI to know us better than we know ourselves. So what would that ultimately mean for individuals and societies and business? And if this is our current trajectory, is this something that we should be pushing back on?
I'll answer from the technology perspective first, and then Stanley can talk more from the storytelling perspective. I think we already live in a world where AI knows us better than we know ourselves for some narrow task. For example, TikTok knows what videos we want to watch, or at least we'll click on and watch. And Amazon knows more about what we want to buy than we probably do ourselves. And Expedia probably knows more about where we want to go on next vacation. And I think this is both a benefit, but also a problem, because these companies don't always have our benefit as their primary goal. In their AI objective function, they usually use something that approximates money making for them, such as click through, eyeballs, revenue, etc. And that's not so aligned with our interests. But I wanted to shed some light in the analysis in the book that when you have a powerful tool like AI with this objective function that can optimize for each individual something different, customized, and essentially knows better than the person itself, that can be used on the one side to help companies make money. But if people look at the longer term, they can also be used when they're aligned with our long-term goals to make us more knowledgeable, more likable, more happier. And some of the stories go through and explain how that might be done and paint a more optimistic future, because we have a great tool that we can use. And we should be aware that it's unavoidable that this AI will know us better than ourselves. And why not apply it to good use? And of course, there's the issue of what about personal data? Uh, I don't want all these giant apps to know our data. Also, we talk about how that can be protected through privacy computing, and also can be either managed centrally by someone we trust or managed distributedly and not shared publicly. So I think we try to be thoughtful in how a optimistic future can be built.
So as a science fiction writer, I'm always have more concern on human condition, not only physical condition, but also like mental and psychologically status. So I think in this book we try to find a way like how to measuring the happiness of human beings with the help of technology. But we all know that there's so many complicated parameters in measuring the happiness. But so I think there is a lot of high hope for people here, especially during the pandemic time. So we are all seeking for a meaningful life and healthy and sustainable way of living. So I think in the future, AI might do a lot of good to us.
So one of the risks that you talk about was about bias around AI discrimination. And we've seen some early accidental examples from companies such as Amazon, Apple, Microsoft. What do you think we can do to ensure that AI does work for us and doesn't deepen divides and prejudices and instead becomes a tool for equality?
In the book, in the commentary section, I talked about a couple of possible ways to avoid the problems of AI externalities. That includes bias, as you mentioned, but also personal data protection, explainability, um, and all bias, etc. So one way, obviously, is through regulations. But I would think the regulations should not disable AI, such as don't let companies aggregate data. That would be going too far. And also, I think there can be creative regulations. For example, can there be some mechanism where companies not doing so well can be audited, just like people are audited for tax and financial issues? So these are some ideas on the government side. And then on the private sector side, I think there can be watchdogs that will report companies on their misbehavior, whether it's discrimination, or whether it's customer complaint, or whether it's excessive number of data leaks, or something like a company that has too much fake news or deep fakes. These can be tracked publicly. And for example, when I worked for Google, there were third parties tracking search relevance. So they can be extended to these areas, and then violations would shame the companies, cause them to be damaged in brand and therefore revenue, but also they can be linked to ESG and mechanisms like that to cause investors not to invest in them if they don't do a good job. And then lastly, I think technology is a powerful tool that can often solve problems caused by technology. For example, privacy computing can be used to attack the problem of, can we have our cake and eat it too? Can we have our data safely protected, but also be able to use it for AI? And there can be tools that check on data integrity and the proper coverage and balance before AI is trained. This way, the problems you mentioned on Amazon or Microsoft, where they had an uneven distribution of racial data or gender data that cause discrimination, that can be largely avoided if we could have essentially an AI compiler, let's say, built into TensorFlow or PyTorch, checks for balance of your data and having sufficient data to train to avoid such problems. So I think working in US, corporate governance, private sector solutions, government regulations, and technologies can overcome most of these issues.
I think besides what Kai-Fu just mentioned, I think one thing is very important is to raise the awareness of the people, because the inequality of the development of AI technology across the countries, society, and class. So I think there's a lot of people, like especially vulnerable groups, that actually have no idea about like what's gonna lose when they are adapted into the technology and the grid. So I think using narratives, different kind of narratives within the among different mediums, I think we can educate and enlighten the people to be aware of the privacy, all this kind of bias, discrimination issues behind the usage of technology. So that means they can be more smartly to be adapted to the technology.
Point. And that's kind of a theme that we have been hearing a lot of, about how we can educate people and bring more people into data sets and AI. And it kind of leads into explainability, which has been a challenge that we keep kind of coming up against. And wondering what your thoughts are around how we might get to more transparent AI algorithms in the future. And also, if you have any advice for the humans who are held accountable for AI algorithms and the output.
Yeah, for technology to help with transparency and explainability, I think I think sometimes people are thinking too much as technologists, right? Because we know that these complicated thousand-dimensional spaces cannot be fully explained in terms of that people can understand. But it doesn't mean that AI cannot explain itself in human understandable terms that approximate this logic. For example, if we take a neural network that made a decision not to give someone a loan, and the person says, "Why didn't you give me a loan?" There can be some kind of a um, principal component analysis or something like that that determines the most likely factors and renders it in a language that people can understand. Because after all, when a human complains about a loan officer who didn't give him or her a loan, the human has to do something like that. It's not one factor, it's an approximation of the major factors. So I think explainability can be addressed by doing its best in human terms, not expecting full mathematical precision. And we should measure explainability not on how perfect the explanations are, but on on doing no worse than human explanations. I think we should measure a lot of AI that way, because if you start measuring against perfection, it's just not realistic. And so I think try to do better than humans, and then using that as a bar of initial usability, and then hopefully over time, as more data is gathered, AI will get better and better. That's the general philosophy I hope we can generally adopt. That said, I do believe, to the second part of your question, that people working in AI should treat their job as a very serious matter because they can impact people's lives on how well people can do, whether people are discriminated, what opportunities people get, and also it can hurt people's lives and cause fatal errors if mistakes are made by AI engineers. So just like in the medical profession, there's the Hippocrates oath that we shall harm no life. And I think something serious needs to be done for people, practitioners of AI, and that they should learn about ethics and the downside and what things to avoid. I believe that's going to become a more and more integral part of AI training.
In
I
my
absolutely.
opinion, yeah,
Oh, I
please.
absolutely agree. But yes, if you'd like to add in, go ahead.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think we should include more diverse perspective and conversation from interdisciplinary people, like people from humanities, for sure. Like back in the day when Macy's conference was happened, like when Wiener raised his theory of cybernetics. So I think we need more diverse perspective on this kind of big issue, not only from engineering and scientific perspective.
That's great. I have one more question, but I just wanted to open up and let the audience have an opportunity to ask a question. If there's anybody who would like to raise their hand, or if you'd like to get involved online, we have a question right here. If you'd like to, we can bring him a microphone. Thanks. If you'd like to just stand up and say your name and where you're from, that'd be great. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. I'm Emmanuel, a journalist from Athens, Greece. Are all those beautiful things that you described applicable in China? Because it seems that it is not a technical issue, AI, it is a rather political issue. Is AI compatible with democracy? Thank you very much.
I think maybe you're reading too much of the media that doesn't fully cover issues fairly. China's AI entrepreneurial community is very vibrant. Otherwise, I wouldn't have a job. We've invested in 50 AI companies, 9 of which are unicorns, and they will be public companies. So I think China has a lot of data, and the data is used largely by private corporations. And because China has more data, these corporations use the data and then create better products. And that's why China is a leader in AI. I don't think I don't think China's success with AI is largely due to government centrally coordination. Surely there have been some good policies, but largely it's a market phenomenon.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our session. But for all of you, be sure to check out this book. Like I said, at 11:05, I think, we are giving some away in the catering session. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.